Hi everyone, it's Tony Tonkin here from Things That Matter. And I'm live feeding this today because if there's anybody that does join in and wants to have a conversation with us about any of the things that I'm talking about, well, this is an opportunity for you to do so, and we'd be more than happy, or I would be more than happy to have that conversation with you. Before I start, I just want to let everybody know that we're thinking of you at this time of the year. This is a time when we're particularly concerned about the coronavirus. And I'm kind of hoping, thinking ahead, that in years to come, if people review this video, they will remember the time that we all went through, and that this is a really important time for many of us to manage how we're feeling so that we can better react with the people around us, because this is a very stressful time and we want it to be a safe time for everybody concerned. So we want it to be safe for you, we want it to be safe for those people that you love the most, and we want it to be safe in terms of your mental well-being and of course your physical well-being as well. So thanks for being with us, we really appreciate it. We'll just see how we go with regard to this live feed. I'd like you to, if you really like our live feeds around this anger management program, that you do subscribe to this channel. There will be more and more of these coming over the next few weeks, and we'd like you to participate in them as much as you can. If this works out okay today, we'll do more and more live feeds so that they're available for a conversation for us to have as well. And we'll try and schedule a regular time so that you know. But if you do ring the bell and you like what you're seeing, you will get notifications when the live feeds come up, so you'll be able to watch them live. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll just see kind of how we go with this over the next few weeks. Now, you may remember last week we talked about the anger cycle in the previous session. If you haven't viewed the previous sessions, please do so now. Go and have a look at the other sessions, and then perhaps you can come back to this later on. They do follow sequentially, and last time we talked about the anger cycle, where people sit in that anger cycle, and how perhaps they could think about breaking that cycle so they're not repeating it over and over again. They're not damaging the people around them, and they're not damaging themselves in terms of those relationships as well. So just have a look at those previous two sessions and then come to this third session and see whether or not there's anything interesting that we can develop here for you, and I hope that there is. Today I'm going to focus just on emotional programming, which is a concept in relation to how we manage and process our emotions as we're growing up. And it's worth having a look at this. It is a scientifically proved system, and it's something which has been validated over time and is something that is relevant to all of us, particularly in terms of reflecting back at how we have managed emotions, the lessons that we've learned around our emotions, how people have influenced us about how we think and feel about ourselves in particular. And I want to start with this particular, if I can find it, bear with. So I want to start with this story about emotional programming, and the things to remember about emotional programming in particular. And I want to start with a story particularly about this person. So this is a picture of me when I was about 5 years old, I think. And there I am making what I believed was the most fantastic thing I've ever made and probably ever did make and ever will make in years to come, and that is a table. And I was very proud of this table. And many years ago, I came across this photograph, and I was excited about this particular photograph of myself. And then later on, soon after I sort of studied the photograph, a whole lot of images came back to me that were quite significant, and they were emotional images. And I found that I burst out into tears. I was extremely upset by what I had experienced, primarily because when this photo was taken, I can remember being ridiculed by my family. I can remember people putting me down about this table. I was very proud of this table because I actually sat it next to my bed. And the odd thing, as you can imagine by looking at this, is that I wasn't able to sit anything on it because it would just fall off. However, I was very proud of my achievement at making this table. But the people around me put me down around the making of this table, and as a result of that, the distressing thing for me was that from that moment to this, I have never made anything with my hands. And if I wish to have anything repaired, I get someone else in to do it, because the humiliation, the sadness, and the rejection that I received at this moment in my life created a sense of self-doubt, I guess, about my ability to be able to make things with my hand. It isn't that I haven't been able to make things with my hand. I guess it's just that I just choose not to because of how I felt at that particular point in my life. And when I looked at that picture, the one that you see before you now, I broke down in tears. I just could not stop myself from weeping because of what all of this meant to me and how I was feeling emotionally about it. So as a result of all of that, and when I came across, some years later, obviously, when I started to do some work around this stuff, I started to realise where all that came from. And I guess my point is that we all have situations in our lives where we have felt diminished by others, put down by others, made to feel betrayed and fearful and a whole host of other stuff. And that there are moments in our lives where we've all experienced that, as that was one moment in my life. And that impacted the way I chose to behave, basically, for the rest of my life around being able to make things with my hands. It isn't that I haven't been able to, it isn't that I wasn't capable of, it was just that the emotional stuff that sat around it was so entrenched that I decided that I wouldn't do it. I didn't want to confront that emotional stuff anymore. So I choose not to avoid it, obviously. So that brings us to understanding our emotional program. And to help us do that, I just want us to have a look at some ideas around emotional program to help us understand what that means. So our emotional program is simply a set of decisions and beliefs that you made about yourself, others, and the world in general when you were growing up. Between birth and 5 years of age, we receive 50% of our emotional programming. So how we're going to interpret the world is pretty much determined by what we experience within those first 5 years. So how you see your world is going to be about, like my experience around the table I made, is that, I'm incapable of being able to do anything with my hands. So many of us have similar sort of experiences about how we experience our world. So if we're yelled at, screamed at, put down, denigrated in any way when we're growing up, how we view our world to the tune of 50% of how we emotionally respond to that world is going to be taking place in those first 5 years. So between the ages of 5 and 8 years, we receive 30% of our programming, which means that by the time we're 8 years of age, we are programmed psychologically as to how we're going to interact with our world emotionally. And this is really important for us to understand. So when you look back at the first 8 years of your lives, you can ask yourself, what was happening to me during those 8 years? And how did I experience the world during those first 8 years. Now, admittedly, many of us, when I ask people to reflect back on this, as I'll be doing at the end of this session, but when I ask people to look back on this, they struggle to remember what happened within those 8 years. One of the things you can do is ask other people. If there were older siblings, for example, around, you can ask them what was happening to you during those 8 years. You can also think about if you've got any pictures of yourself in that period, you can go back and connect with those pictures. That'll help you to remember what's happening, like I did with that picture with me in that table. So there are ways by which you can actually try to connect with where you were at emotionally around that period. I can remember just recently I was talking to a woman who couldn't understand why she was anxious and stressed for most of her childhood. And when she looked back, she discovered that at the age, and she identified that it was around the age of 6. When she was 6, her father left the family. The mum and dad separated. And that was obviously a very extremely traumatic period for her, at which point she found it difficult as a child to manage the father leaving the family. As a result of that, her relationships seemed to have shattered somewhat because she found it hard to interact with other people simply because she was afraid that they would leave her. So there's lots of connections we could make to how we were feeling at certain stages of our lives and how that impacted us, particularly between 0 and 8. Yeah, you won't remember the first 3 years of your life because we don't, but certainly there's a 5-year period there in which you remember. And start to think about, like, who are the most important people in your life at that particular point in time? How did they influence you? You know, what was your first day like at school? You know, I can remember mine, it was traumatic because I couldn't open my lunchbox. I went home hungry. So, there's lots of things that happen to us at certain stages in our lives. Try to remember what they are, and that you'll find that very helpful in terms of further identifying some of these issues. So, what this means, though, is that by the time you reach adulthood, we're 95% programmed. And a lot of people will think, well, that's a lot. So that means that it's going to be a real challenge for me to be able to deal with the issues that have been happening in my life because I'm 95 programmed in this crappy way, and therefore it's really hard to get rid of the way I've been programmed. Well, that's not necessarily true, because it is with the 5% of our conscious mind that we can understand and change the other 95%. And this is really important for us to remember. If we look back and we can have a look at the influences that were in our lives in the first 8 years of our lives, we'll be able to understand how we can change some of that stuff by simply identifying its existence. Once we've identified its existence, we as adults now know that we can control the behaviour. So, me not being able to make that table, I know that that's not necessarily true. In fact, since I've come to that realisation, which was some 12, 15 years ago, I have put my hands to making and creating things, which in the past I would never have done, because I'm not going to be limited by that idea. That for some of us, that our parents seem to have rejected us at that particular time, and how that's impacted other relationships is worth looking at, because then we'll be able to change the way we choose to interact with people, knowing perhaps that they may not reject us as our parents have. And we can confront the emotions, we can talk about the emotions, and in further sessions we're going to talk about how do we address some of that deep emotional stuff that sits inside us. To carry on, once we understand why you've been doing what you've been doing, you'll be free to change your behaviour permanently. So that's just what I was saying. That once we understand why we've been doing what we've been doing, and I also like to add to that, once we understand not only what we've been doing, but how whatever it is that we've been doing makes us feel, then we'll be free to change our behaviour, not just occasionally, not just every now and again, but we'll be able to change our behaviour permanently. So I hope that gives you an understanding as to how you can address where you feel and what you feel emotionally. So I'm just going to finish by asking you to consider, so this is normally a project I would set for people to do within groups. And so I'm just going to ask you to think about it just individually. So think about what feelings and messages in your family when you were growing up were expressed and were okay. So sometimes those feelings, so sometimes it was okay to express anger because mum or dad or other people in your life expressed anger. So what the question that we're asking is, and I normally get people to write out on a large piece of paper what was okay, what was not okay. So some feelings were okay. It was okay, for example, not to be told that you're loved. So that seemed to be okay. It was okay not to hug. It was okay not to congratulate you for being good at something that you've done, sport, homework, whatever. So it was okay not to be acknowledged. What was not okay? Well, there are sometimes some contradictions because it was not okay to yell, scream and shout for you, not okay to hit and abuse your siblings, but it was okay for mum and dad to do that. So there'll be areas which will seem to be contradictory. It was okay to be seen, but it wasn't okay to give an opinion on anything. It wasn't okay to push back, but it was okay for my dad to push back because, he used to get drunk, get pissed, and he used to have fights in the pub, or used to argue with his bosses, or used to lose jobs all over the place. So there are all these contradictions that happen in our lives. So what we want you to think about is, what are those particular contradictions that you see? So just do 2 columns, what was okay and what was not okay. Then I want you to think about something else. I want you to think about what feelings and messages were also allowed to be expressed. So that was kind of like what I was saying. So what feelings, how were they expressed? So were they, physically hitting, raising one's voices, extreme punishment of any particular type? So how were they expressed that were okay? Did mum and dad hug you? Did they kiss you goodnight every night? Did they read you a book? What did they do to express to you how they were feeling about you? And were those expressions okay? In your view. So and sometimes think about however those expressions were, have you carried those expressions forward to today? And does that make a difference in terms of the types of relationships that you have? The things that were not okay when you were growing up, now that you're looking at it, are they okay for you now? Are they the way you treat others the same as the way that you were treated when you were growing up? So we just need to have a look at those messages that were given to us and how they impacted us emotionally and how they impact some of the decisions that we make in our lives today, which just may not be helpful. So that's session 3. So I just want you to think about the stuff around your emotional programming, where all that came from. You can rewind this video and have a look at it. And then how did that impact your life? What sort of decisions have you made in your life as a result of the way you were emotionally programmed when you were growing up? And then think about how those feelings and so forth were expressed, what was okay and what was not okay as well. And I want you all to think about how I've now taken that stuff that I had when I was growing up and transposed it into current relationships that I have or how I choose to parent. I know that a lot of men that I've worked with over the years have often said to me, well, my father hit me, but I don't hit my kids. No, you don't, but you try and find other ways to control them. You're still yelling at them, you're still screaming, you're still doing some of the behaviours that you grew up with because you believe it was okay. Well, it wasn't okay then, and it's not okay now. You may not be hitting them, but don't pat yourself on the back for not physically assaulting your kids when you're finding other ways for them to feel fearful of you. It just doesn't make sense. So think about how you've adopted some of that stuff and whether or not it's still part of your life. Because it is, and if you identify it as being part of your life, don't feel ashamed of that. Just do something about it. Change it. Become different. That's all we're asking. Just to look at it so that you become different. Thanks for being with us today. Really look forward to catching up with you next time we place a video, which will probably be the next couple of days. And in the meantime, just stay safe, okay? Thanks.